to focus on next is actually looking at related securities. As you can see here, this is a reflection of our corporate structure data set. So essentially all the companies that are either affiliated, subsidiaries of, or related entities of the ultimate parent that you're looking at. You could be looking at GE directly, which is, for a change, I thought I'd focus on GE as opposed to Siemens. But you can either start with the ultimate parent and obviously look through the corporate structure down to see who are the affiliate subsidiaries, etc. Or you can, of course, do it the other way around. So, for example, you might start with General Electric Capital Corporation, and you want to see who is the ultimate parent or who is the nearest parent altogether, and then who is the ultimate parent if you're looking to roll this up to parent level entity. What you can also see is that this function tells you where we have various data sets associated with a particular company within the hierarchy of, in this case, General Electric. So you can see you have the options for debt data, equity, or fundamentals, and it's denoted by these little squares or colored squares that you see here. So of course we have information across the board for General Electric, the parent, but we have debt data for General Electric Capital Corporation, which is where I'm guessing a lot of the credit issuances or fixed income issuances, hence the green. But then as we scroll down, you will also see some fundamentals data coming through, for example, for GE Hungary, or the subsidiary or related entity even of GE Hungary. So you can build up a corporate structure picture very easily using Bloomberg, and it can be a very interesting analysis to do, especially if you're looking, for example, at the company's debt issuance and you want to really connect that to the parent. And also learn who is important, who isn't from a corporate structure perspective. A related function that I want to show you is then CCB. This is a different way of looking at a company. This is slicing and dicing company revenues into segmental reporting and then mapping them into a standardized classification system. I'm sure most of you have seen me mention this in relation to the EU taxonomy, for example, but I wanted to highlight this as it is really useful in fundamental analysis as well of fundamental reviews beyond ESG. For example, you can see this is GE US revenues broken down into constituent parts. You can always see the transparency as to how the mapping is done. For obviously here we're looking at wind energy equipment, and you can see what is included here from a segmental perspective in line with the way GE reports is onshore wind and power conversion, nuclear and other, and you can click through to the source documents to understand why it has been included within this particular segment. You can also click on this division and you can very quickly see who the peer group companies are involved in this same business area or generating revenues from the same type of businesses. You can see what their market cap is, of course. You can also see their total revenues, and you can see how much, or rather, you can see how much this division generates for them, or this line of business generates for the company, and the percentage that contributes to the total revenues. I apologize, I misspoke before. And I apologize for the pop-up. So you can do that very quickly and easily, whether you are looking at a company for the first time or whether you really want to dig into the peers. You can very quickly see and understand who the appropriate peer group may be, and obviously either use one of ours or derive your own. It is also important to note that the little star that you see here tells you when that particular business, in this case hydro energy equipment, is the main revenue segment for that particular company. So you can see we're looking at 7 companies here whose main business is hydro energy equipment, versus for General Electric it being just 2.04% of their revenues. So a useful data set, obviously very useful in the context of ESG and impact investing and understanding a company's exposures from that perspective, but also extremely useful in understanding a company's main drivers, what the end markets are, and what are the most significant businesses from a company perspective. This also then nicely relates to our corporate actions data set. And again, I use in this webinar, I'm using the terms function and data interchangeably, because this is very much looking on data, focusing on data and the data that you have accessible to you, but of course represented to you within the Bloomberg terminal functionality. When you type in CACS, so C-A-C-S, you can see all the corporate actions associated with the particular company that you're looking at. So in this case, we're looking at GE US. We're looking at actions between those dates, and you can, of course, at the moment we're not filtering for any, but you can always narrow in on the type of actions that you're most interested in. So whether you're doing a research piece, or whether you're considering whether there is a potential for a company to split its shares, which obviously in this case is irrelevant, you can always come here and do very quick analysis even before you do any further, before you seek any further information. A related function, but one that starts off looking at all securities globally rather than honing in on a single security, is CACT, C-A-C-T, and it does exactly the same thing. You can, of course, choose to load it for a single security, which will take you back to CACS, or you can pick from a monitor screen, security worksheets, which is the more up-to-date name for them, or you can pick from other portfolio-related functionality here, such as portfolio. You can also look at equity screens, etc. Once you have picked your universe, you can then, of course, narrow further by the type of actions, and you can really explore what the company has been doing from a corporate actions perspective. You can also create a template for future use. You can edit the current template, and you can also create an alert. So like with a lot of other Bloomberg functionality, when there is new data, when there is new information coming through, when there are new corporate actions, you can always be alerted to those. Again, another related data set, and I suppose this is more building a little bit of analytics on top of the data sets that you see on CACT and CAS, is MA, and this is looking at mergers and acquisitions specifically. There is a lot packed into this function, and as this is not a function-specific session, I will not go particularly deeply into it, other than to say that you can slice and dice the transactions very quickly and easily here. So for example, if you want to understand what completed M&A transactions GE has performed in Asia Pacific year to date in this case, so you can see the date range, and you want to hone in on industrial sector, which would be sensible given that it is an industrial company, you can very quickly get a feel for what they have been doing, where they have been investing, and you can do further analysis using the tabs at the top. You can also edit the search with with a much more advanced screen here. When you click into the advanced search, you can actually become very, very specific in terms of which universe you want to review and what it is that you want to focus on. So for example, if I click on deal type, you will see that there are a lot more options than simply M&A, investment, joint venture, spin-offs, and buybacks. You can actually decide and determine which deal attributes you want to focus in on. Again, a related function building on the same data set is IPO. While M&A looks at, or MA looks at M&A transactions, and surprisingly, IPO looks at any equity transactions or equity offerings rather. So outside of M&A, it looks at, of course, IPO, additional issues, rights issues, essentially everything else within the corporate actions world. It works in exactly the same way, so I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on it, but just to highlight that you have both the data and the analytical tools that you have access to. And if you're starting your analysis afresh, of course, corporate actions are a very important contributor to your analysis, and perhaps at times of difficulty, you might also be thinking about some companies that will be taking opportunities to boost and change perhaps their portfolio. Last word on corporate actions, and last function to highlight to you in that context is the BIP, or buyer intent profile. Looking further at M&A transactions and honing in on the behavior of the particular corporate that you are looking at, which can, of course, be a very interesting piece of analysis. So you can see we're looking at GE again, which is the company of choice from my perspective for today's webinar, and you can see historically where have they tended to target their M&A activity. In this case, North America and Europe have been dominating. You can see 467 transactions in North America. You can click through on it, of course, and again, the list at the bottom changes. You can also see that they've been favoring financial investments, but you can also look at what have they been inquiring in the industrial sector, which is, after all, what their focus is on. And you can also look at the additional information specifically for that corporate, whether you're working with a corporate or you're analyzing the corporate or making recommendations to your clients about that particular corporate. You can click through, and GE is probably not the best one to choose from this perspective because it has such a long history of M&A transactions. But when it loads, you will see the deal distribution that it has historically had, and obviously you can infer future behavior potentially from that information, or simply use it for those information purposes. You have also information on their acquisition criteria and the advisors that they have historically used within their transactions. I apologize that this is still loading, so I will move on in the interest of time because I have quite a bit to cover today, so I won't dwell on it, but do have a look at this. If this is an interesting data set from your perspective, it can be very useful. I'll move on to the credit side of things. As you know, Bloomberg is a multi-asset or cross-asset platform. And of course, while we can provide you a lot of information at entity level, issuer level, and we collect a lot of data from that perspective, we also do have a lot of information from a credit analysis perspective. And first and foremost, what you're looking at here is General Electric's credit profile. And essentially, this is giving you a feel, or rather the data that pertains to its credit ratings, if that is, again, of importance to you, or as we go into potential recession now and balance sheets come into focus, of course, credit is likely to become more important and more interesting. So you can come here to ascertain the credit ratings landscape for General Electric in this case. You can also see additional pieces of information and click-throughs. First and foremost is Bloomberg Default Risk Analysis, and that function or that data set is called DRSK, and essentially you can look at the 1-year probability of default from a Bloomberg modeling perspective. You can click through on a particular data point. You can also click on others and the chart changes. You can obviously play with the model inputs as well, and you can amend those. But more importantly, this gives you a very quick feel for what is the probability of default for a company like General Electric, or probably more relevant for some of the smaller issues you might be looking at. Whether there is any risk, especially in the recessionary scenario. You will see that you can also change the time period over which you look if you want to analyze it further. But this is just to highlight that this is accessible to you. You have all the information there. If you click on a particular data point, I suppose they call it, you can see that General Electric is equivalent to investment grade 6, and you can see why it is classified as that. You know, why it is investment grade, why it is 6 as opposed to 1, and essentially that depends on the default probability that we calculate. What you will also see if we go back to CRPR is the Bloomberg market implied probability of default. What market, market implied probability of default screen does is it leverages BFAL's rich data sets to distill market sentiment into an issuer and sector level creditworthiness indicator that reacts to changing market conditions and especially during the times of stress. So this is an additional measure to DRSK. It is very much looking at what is implied by market sentiment. And again, you can see while it looks somewhat different to DRSK, you can also hone in on what it is that you want to look at, the type of corporates that you want to look at, or specifically the corporates that you are interested in using this functionality. You have access to some of the top level data. There is, of course, an expanded offering available for enterprise clients in particular, but you should be able to access this within your work stream if you're interested in looking at credit and if you want to dig deeper beyond simply the credit ratings that are available to you. Another couple of functions relating to credit, which I think are very interesting from the equity markets perspective or equity player types perspective, and the first one is debt distribution profile. So it's this DDIS if you haven't used it before, but essentially it enables you to see what a company's credit profile looks like. Again, very relevant going into a recession, most likely, when balance sheets do come into focus. But it gives you that profile. You can see the credit profile of the company. You can see it split by types of credit. You can see amounts available. You can see where the interest payments are due. You can see the loans if the company has it, and other facilities, so such as bond issuance here. You can also compare the company to others. So when you click on the criteria button at the top, you can very quickly add a different corporate. So for example, I will pick my favorite, Siemens, and when I add Siemens to this, you can very quickly compare GE's credit profile to Siemens's credit profile, and of course make an assessment of your comfort levels with the company's balance sheets. I, of course, again have picked two of the industrial large caps, but when looking at smaller companies, it becomes all the more important. And to be fair, it is not unimportant for the large guys either. What you can also see is where the debt is actually held. And that you can see within cost. So this is the capital structure as opposed to corporate structure view. And you can see exactly where in General Electric's corporate structure the debt is held and therefore what the capital structure is. You can look at it and it is dynamic in that sense. You can also click in and see exactly what are the instruments and what is the debt that is held in each particular entity. So, for example, I can go to GE East Africa, and you can see they have unsecured loans. You can also see whether, for example, the debt of that particular entity is guaranteed by the parent entity, and you can then of course dig deeper into each issuance, each instrument, if you want to do that further additional analysis. But what I wanted to highlight is that you have this wealth of data to understand the company's creditworthiness, to understand any risk inherent from the credit perspective, where the debt is held, and of course perform your analysis, enhance your equity analysis with a view on the credit side. Moving on, however, again, I'm very conscious of time, back into the issuer level world. We looked at kind of the more descriptive aspects of the data that is available to you, as well as transactional data. We have looked at the credit side of things. And while I won't dwell on the financial data, kind of the issuer or parent company level, even better, company level financial data that I have shown you all in the past, and I mentioned in the previous webinar, of course, I will just put a reminder here. You have all the data connected to company's own financials available to you within FA. As a reminder, you have all the as-reported data as well as Bloomberg standardized data, and this is where the data the naming conventions are standardized That's most of the adjustment, and also standardized adjustments. If you do want to analyze a large universe and you're happy with standardized adjustments, you have that data accessible to you, as well as a wealth of ratios, segmental information. So this is the data that then rolls into company classifications and is standardized to aid comparability, but here it is stored in its raw form. You have additional information that is sector specific and industry specific, which in the case of industrials is less prominent than it will be for an oil and gas company, for example. And of course, you have the ESG data that, again, I have mentioned many a time and in my previous webinars. All of it comes with transparency. All of it you can perform your own due diligence on. And of course, all of it is fully tickerized for you to take into your own models, your own worksheets, your own bespoke pieces of work. You can get the definitions by right-clicking on each field. You can get the definition, and you can also, of course, get the mnemonic. You may prefer to get the mnemonic for Excel purposes or for worksheet purposes using a field search function, or for ESG, something like ESGD. But just to remind you that the data is all there, and we have fundamentals going back 20 years or more. You also have access to MODL, and again, this is something that I have shown recently and in the previous section, so I won't dwell on it. But again, a reminder that you have a fully fledged consensus product. You have top-level consensus across the board. You also have segmental consensus, which you can see here for over 4,000 companies now, and of course that universe is growing continuously. And the beauty of MODL, of course, is that it ties the historic data that the companies have reported with the forward-looking data. As a reminder, if you click on the little arrows at the bottom, you can see more periods. You can click on any number here to see who the contributors are to that particular number. You cannot see the individual contributions, and I can't see them either, as you can see, but you can nevertheless understand who the contributors are. You can drag and drop from here, and you can see when I hover over it, can you see there's a little shadow that shows me that I'm dragging that particular number. You can drag and drop it into Excel, and it is very easily integrated into your workflows with detailed consensus, which, having not had it previously, Bloomberg has been building up with these bespoke views for each company that there are sufficient number of consensus contributors for. Switching tack slightly, I will now go into the macro world, and I will just drag and drop this screen here to make it as seamless as possible. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the economics data sets and the economics data that is accessible to you on the Bloomberg terminal. I'm guessing most of you would have seen this screen previously. This is an economic calendar screen. It is a really good place to follow and monitor economic releases and very quickly see how they come in versus prior reported data points, as well as any survey expectations, if there are, of course, consensus expectations available. So it's a very handy screen, but it doesn't give you much of a history, and of course it isn't necessarily reflective of the complete data set that we can offer from an economic or macro perspective. A really good place to look for economic data, therefore, is this page here, which is World Economic Statistics. It is ECST on the terminal, and you can essentially get lost in the wealth of economic data that Bloomberg has onboarded. It is very nicely and systematically displayed. In this case, we're looking at the United Kingdom. You can very easily change the country that you're looking at. So, for example, we can look at United States instead, and you can see the full breadth of economic statistics that we have collected with full history. You can change the dates here, of course. You can search for specific pieces of information. You can see that you can create your own custom views, and there are custom views or sample views already available to you. And of course, this is just the top level of of statistics that you see here. For example, if I dig into whole economic activity, you can see that we have all data on business starts, corporate bankruptcies, economic outlook. If I look at government finance and debt and then go into government budget balance, I have additional data. And of course, there is a huge wealth of information available here. What you will notice is that this data is all historic, and the World Economic Statistics, or ECST monitor, is very much created and designed to look at historic data. If you want to look at forward-looking data, the screen you need is economic forecasts, and it's called ECFC, and it is this screen here that I'm currently looking at or showing you. You can see I have picked United States in this case, and you can see, similarly to MODL for corporates, what this does and what this gives you is a connection between obviously historic data and forward-looking numbers. Again, there is a wealth of data that you can look at. You can look at the contributor composite or individual contributors. You can look at different periods, and you can also look at both private forecasts or private expectations, i.e. the banks, etc., private consensus, or official guidance, quote unquote, and I'm sure the economists will pull me up on my definitions. But you can toggle between the two, and you can look at the forecast 3 years out, rather than just looking at the expectations for a particular data point that you have on eco and the nearest data point at that. And of course, again, you can toggle between countries, you can look at charts, etc. The other resource that I think not all of you may be familiar with, but I think it is a great resource and gives you a wealth of information, is BECO. This is Bloomberg Economics, and this is their homepage. They do a lot of commentary work, a lot of additional analysis when it comes to macro trends. They write in a very similar manner to BI, Bloomberg Intelligence, which I'll cover in a minute, very briefly. But essentially, you have a big team of economists who are monitoring economic events and macro events globally and providing you with very short form commentary, as well as some very interesting analytics. And as always, you can use these charts, you can use the work they do, you can replicate them, and it's a really good way of getting to know our data, as well as, of course, staying on top of macro news. As with BI, they have a research part, and they also have their own data library. They bring forecasts together. They have their own forecasts as well. So you will see that they have medium-term and long-term forecasts and nowcasts. They also look at consensus, bringing in the ECFC data. And they have a number of tools such as Shock, which looks at potential implications of historic type of economic scenarios playing out going forward. So a wealth of resources. Again, if you're not macro experts, this can be very helpful and very interesting, both from a perspective of integrating into your models, but also from a monitoring perspective for macro data and news. I have a few more things to show you. I'm very conscious of time that I'm running out, so I will speed through them. But please do let me know if you'd like additional sessions on these parts. I can spend a lot of time on them. First and foremost, a resource for industry-specific data, Bloomberg Intelligence. This is their homepage called BI. You can very easily hone in on the industry or sector that you would like to look at. You can see the link to Bloomberg Economics as well. And do keep in mind that they also look at credit, for example. They look at strategy. They look at commodities and have a wealth of data and information that they bring together in those pages. The whole purpose of BI is to bring in information on particular sectors and particular industries together in one place, both from Bloomberg as a source and third parties, to make your life easier, essentially. So, for example, if I show you a specialty chemicals page, you will see all of the BI pages are broken out in the same way, and you can see it translating from Bloomberg Economics as well. You have a research part, again, short form commentary highlighting interesting data and interesting themes or interesting feedback, for example, from company reports, and a data library that will bring together Bloomberg and third-party data. You can also see the list of contributors that contribute to data on this page over here and click through directly through them. So a really useful resource. Again, it's a data that goes beyond Bloomberg only data, and any data you see here you can use within your own work. Another great industry-specific data resource, and this is where we start going into the ESG world more, is BNEF, and that is used to be Bloomberg New Energy Finance. Now, of course, covers a much broader range of sectors. And if you have your own Bloomberg terminal, so a Bloomberg Anywhere license, you can click through and access all of their work on their website. Some of it is, of course, integrated into the terminal, and we increasingly become more and more integrated. But the website gives you the full breadth of the resources and their data. So again, you have access to all of the data, and they look and do primary analysis and forecasting for any industry that is exposed to decarbonization and transition. It has my mention of ESG, and it gives me a nice route into an introduction to ESG. If you haven't, if you're not acquainted with our ESG offering, please do come to me. I'd love to tell you more about it. But in the meantime, I'll leave you with these pages. You have BESG, which gives you an overview of everything we do from an ESG perspective. You will see there is a section dedicated to data and estimates, but don't ignore the other ones, because there is more data than beyond this. This section focuses on as reported data and sustainable debt, as well as our estimates product. But you have a lot of information and a lot of interesting data accessible to you via scores, our climate risk offering, European regulation as well, and obviously regulation more broadly soon. ESGD is an ESG data discovery library, and it works like Field Search, but is much more focused, or is focused on ESG only. And again, you can explore, you can click on any particular metric and see exactly what it stands for, and this is where the connection to Field Search comes in. And you can, of course, integrate this data, anything that has been tickerized, which all of the data here has been, into your other workflows on the terminal. And finally, on ESG, I know I have run out of time. If I go back to GEUS, I just wanted to flag the ESG function to you, because it gives you a really good insight into the breadth of the data we have in one place. It also gives you insight into the breadth of analytics that we do from an ESG perspective, and it's a really good place to start if you are looking at ESG and understanding what Bloomberg has, and you don't feel like reading the BESG pages, which I showed you before. Two last highlights, and then I shut up and let you all go. I apologize for overrunning slightly. First and foremost, supply chain data, and I don't know why I have a fund loaded here. That's my omission. Again, our low GE, and this is just a reminder of this wonderful data set that connects the suppliers and customers together with a central entity. It is an amazing resource if you want to analyze supply chains, be it in the context of ESG and understanding what a company's supply chain looks like from an ESG perspective, or you want to analyze it from a risk perspective, for example, due to macro geopolitical events. Please do have a look. It gives you a huge wealth of resources. You can see that we also produce estimates where we can viably estimate the size of these relationships, and it is a data set available again both on the terminal and the data license world. And finally, it is connected to this data set here, which looks like a load of yellow blobs on a map, which it is, but this is our facilities data set where we collect physical assets data for individual companies across their asset base. We now have, I think, just over 225,000 facilities that are part of this data set, covering around 11,700 companies, and it's constantly growing. We collect a broad set of data for each facility we can find. And of course, if you're looking at climate risk in particular, as well as the interrelationships between suppliers, customers, and the potential impact of climate events, this is a great data set to know, and also, of course, function on the terminal. But unfortunately, I don't have time to show it to you today. I apologize for keeping you so long. Thank you so much for staying with me. I won't cover questions, but I will come back to you individually with questions.